way, and you observe them. What do they like in worship leadership? How do they interact with people between services? Do they run back to the pastor study and hide until the next service? Are they out shaking hands? Are they trying to find people that need connection? Like, what do they like? How do they function? And then I would say I also have some really intentional one-on-one time. And so this might be one person that you recommend or trust from your team. You've got to decide at this point in the process how deep you want to dig. Do you want someone to have a confidential conversation with each candidate about their brokenness? They certainly have brokenness. I promise you, if you have a pastor candidate who says they don't have any brokenness, they have never had sin in their life, like, they're liars. Every one of us has brokenness and pain and have struggled with the same things you struggle with. And if they can't talk about that, then they probably can never pastor somebody who's going through that struggle. So how do you assess, do they have a self-awareness of their own brokenness? Can this candidate relate to my brokenness? Does he or she have the ability to wrestle with their own sin in their life and take it before the Lord and repent and turn that into discipleship in their own journey of faith? So to decide how deep you want to dig, how much you want to make that a confidential conversation, but this is a very pastoral conversation where you are talking heart to heart and you're looking and studying the person's character. Are they really who they say they are? The framework, and I'll just tell you, we use a framework of conversation for this 4-hour one-on-one conversation that's actually built around the 7 deadly sins. And we address each one of these, and as we do it, we're sharing our own story of brokenness and experience. And I'll do this only with male candidates, and we'll have women on our team do it with female candidates, and because of the level of character that we choose to study in our work. But you need to make that decision for yourself. It's also great if you can to include a meal with the spouse and kids, just to see how this person functions as a parent and as a spouse. That isn't something you're necessarily, it's not a make or break whether or not you're going to hire the person. And I always say that, like, it's the most awkward part of the interview when you invite yourself over for dinner. But I just said, let's just have pizza. I'll just hang out with you and the kids. It's just a friend. But it could be a valuable thing that you include to get this real full picture of who they're like character-wise. And then the reference process, I would just say use more than 3 references. Anybody can come up with 3 people that like them. We actually ask candidates for 10 references, and they always go 10. And they actually have to think, like, who do I want to give references? And then we say we'll commit to following up with 7, and we use an online survey, any of the free online survey tools. We just have people, it's a survey that people could fill out in a reference form in about 30 minutes. So they give us written thought at their own convenience. And then we say we'll follow up with 3 by phone. So we're getting at least 7 people to respond to an online function, and then we're calling, having conversations with at least 3, sometimes more. And then include a background check. Ideally, this would not be necessary, but if you did happen to hire a pastor with a criminal predatory background and you didn't know it, that would be on you as a PNC. So it's just worth spending the money to do the background check. Wish that wasn't necessary, but I would say do it. So all of that's to address the character. All right, so the 5th step, not the last, but the 5th is to actually bring them in. And this is where you might be down to your final 2 or 3. You bring the candidates in to meet and visit with you. Often this is a long final interview where they are interviewing the search team's interviewing them. This is an important place to have good questions lined up and be ready to answer. There might be an extended time meeting elders or key staff leaders, so there's a whole variety of ways you can function or frame what we call the weekend experience. Giving candidates time with their spouse to visit neighborhoods. Sometimes if a candidate's relocating, church even setting somebody up for, like, they come in Saturday morning, breakfast, 3 hours of interview with the candidate, lunch with the spouse and search team spouses. Afternoons, the candidates and spouse have a chance to go visit neighborhoods with a realtor or something. And then Sunday morning, they actually worship anonymously with you. And then Sunday afternoon, there's lunch with the search team to do any kind of follow-up questions, check in, just break bread together one more time, send them on their way. After you've done, the candidates have a chance to really have that face-to-face weekend experience. If you do that with 2 or 3 candidates, then you're finally narrowing down. The PNC says we think we have our, sometimes unanimous, usually consensus, number 1 choice, and then that person is invited in for the candidating weekend. So then the last part is to just finish well. The PNC sometimes thinks all they have to do is get to the candidating weekend, and then they're done. Like then the congregation votes, and we're checked out. Sadly, a lot of, and this is both Presbyterian and across the spectrum, independent, non-denominational, other churches, compensation is a conversation that hurts feelings. And this is often a place that a candidate says, well, you know what, this is not what I was expecting, and walks away. And so make sure you do that part well. Be kind, be good stewards of your church's resources, but be generous. As generous as you can for your pastors and their families. Timing of start date is another thing you need to figure out. Of course, once you have that candidate weekend, everybody wants to pastor there next weekend. But you're relocating someone, and that person has a family. There's just a lot of transition things to think through. So do that well, the timing of the start. And then I also encourage the PNC to not think of that being the end of their time, but they evolve also into an onboarding team. And that's at least some part of that PNC becomes a team that's both prayer support and just helping that person relationally land well. To help that woman or man to find their niche, get off to a good start. So it's like a support team or a cabinet, or you can call it different things, but to onboard that person well is really a valuable part of the game. So I've just blasted you with a really thorough process, and I went really fast through that. I would be happy to go back and go deeper into more pieces, and if you want to know more about what I've seen or experienced or have done, we can go deeper on any of these parts. Yeah?
You mentioned the PCUSA pastors coming out as a stepping stone. Do you have any other suggestions on things you like to look out for? I know you mentioned candidates may have potential hidden brokenness.
Yeah, so I think at each phase you're looking at different things, different pieces. Generally, things to look out for, I'd say, for eco churches that are engaged in a pastor search process. Yeah, what are the candidates that are coming to you running from? And it's not fair to say all PCUSA pastors are running away from that. So don't make that a blanket absolute stereotype on us, on them. But that is something to be aware of. The hidden kind of that brokenness piece for sure, and if what they're trying to hide, what they're not good at addressing, and again, none of those may or may not be deal breakers. And I had a PCUSA church that I was in conversation with, and we told them what we do in that process about going deep. And there was someone on their team. This is in a large urban setting, and she's a HR executive at the firm that she works for, and it made her uncomfortable how deep we go into the character assessment. So they actually chose not to partner with us because they didn't want to go that deep. They didn't want to know about their pastor's brokenness and whether or not they could address that. Like she had no, that's an employment question. You just can't go there. So that's something you all will need to decide as a church how deep you want to go into that character assessment and how you want to handle that with confidentiality and dignity and respect and also mutuality. The person you send into that conversation needs to be willing to share their own brokenness in their church as well. Yeah, and I mean, I think I don't know if there's any other like blanket things to be on the lookout for. One of the things, we spend a lot of time talking with candidates and digging into kind of questions of pride and narcissism. There's unfortunately a high level of narcissism in the clergy, professional clergy ranks. And so that's a high value for us as an organization, so we dig deep into that. Some churches or some organizations want that hard-driving person that might need to have a little bit of narcissism to take on the task that this church wants you to have. So again, if that's what you're looking for, you'll know that about yourself. Like, we need someone that's got a ton of pride, like confidence bordering on egotistical to lead us. Okay, if that's what God's calling you to have as a pastor, then you know what to look for. But more often than not, that's a hidden issue in pastors, is they just have that ego that has become unhealthy for any number of reasons. Yeah?
Thank you for this, it's helpful. My question is kind of a background, I guess,
Okay.
global question. I'm very concerned about how we raise up this next generation of pastors. And with a few students in our church, it's a hard sell to what? This is kind of crass, but be abused and not make any money? No, thank you.
Yeah.
So is there work being done, or are there people that really have a heart for that and are kind of looking at it from that angle? What do we need to do as a church to say when you're following God's call, it's worthwhile regardless? You know what I'm saying? How do we, if we're losing 40%, how do we bring up young people into the ministry? How do we encourage that?
Well, there's no good answer for that right now, and I think no easy answer. And that's one of the I don't know how many of you have come across this book. Todd Bolsinger is a professor at Fuller Seminary. He was the pastor of San Clemente Presbyterian Church before he went to the Fuller staff. This is an excellent book, and I'll give away the big zinger. So, Canoeing in the Mountains. What he talks about is the Lewis and Clark expedition. And when those guys set out to find the Northwest Passage, what they had expected was they'd sort of follow, the Mississippi River all the way up to the headwaters, and they'd be able to see this little rise, and they'd be able to portage their canoes over the rise and find the headwaters to the river that would take them to the Pacific. And of course, they got to the end of the Mississippi, and they don't see any rise or any water, and then they start hiking, and they're carrying all their stuff, and the next thing they see is the Rocky Mountains. And Lewis and Clark had to make an important decision right then. They're looking at the Rocky Mountains, and they're saying, we've got rivermen, we've got canoers and boats, and what we need is mountaineers. And if you keep thinking like a riverman and try to go over the Rocky Mountains in winter, you're gonna die. So they had to stop thinking like rivermen, and they had to transition the way they thought about it. They had to abandon all the stuff that they didn't need to make it over the Rocky Mountains to complete their journey. And what he's framing is that is an adaptive leadership challenge. And what most churches do is address things with technical leadership. And what he's proposing is we're no longer riverboat country. We're now into the Rocky Mountains, but most of us are still thinking like riverboat people. And where our next generation of leadership comes, that's a Rocky Mountains challenge, and we don't have any good ideas for that yet. So we've actually got to adaptively think about leadership development differently than we have. So that I'm not a prophet. And like Ed said yesterday, Stetzer said yesterday, I'm not a prophet, I'm not from a line of prophets, and I work for a non-profit organization. So, same. Yeah.
So, just thinking of a few horror stories that we've been through, presbytery-wise, I think the theological and polity fit aspect of this is crucial. We had churches called Baptist preachers. The polity is so different. The theology is different. They're solid evangelicals. They love the gospel, but so much else creates problems. And so there's got to be a way to are they going to be buying in to who we are as Presbyterians? And that's crucial. And some of them will lie to you, and they'll get in and they'll want to make you Baptists or Congregationalists or whatever, and it's also crucial. I don't know if your company does this for them or what, but check with the previous governing body. They know who these people are. It's a safety thing, and you've got to discern whether they are directive or collaborative in your leadership style, because you mess that up, and you get somebody who you've got a session that's working really, really well together, knows how to be Presbyterian, knows how to walk this out, and you get a directive pastor in there, it's going to create havoc, because that pastor is going to tell you, well, this is how you're going to do it, and that's, and you're going to end up with problems. So those are, I think those are some crucial things, and we've had to deal with them Presbyterian-wise, all of them in just this short time.
Yeah, and that's thank you. Barry's a transitional pastor, and so he's seen a couple of these things happen in presbyteries. I would say there is a value to having a pastor who has a directive style in leadership, as long as they have the character to do well in a pastoral role with a directive style of leadership. And that's what you don't necessarily see in the pro-scan, is you might see a very high kind of a dominant, ooh, that sounds bad for a pastor in a leadership role. And even as I'm so thankful that I'm in ECO, and I'm so thankful for the ways that the high value we have on empowerment of women. But if you have a woman candidate who shows up as dominant, I'm sorry, we still have some preconceived notions that that's a bad thing. And a dominant woman leader could be a great asset and a gift to the church if she has the character to lead well with a pastor's heart. And so there are some things about holding out loosely what you're looking for and determining what you need and being open to the Spirit of God in that. Yeah. Okay, here?
Yeah, I'm coming from a medium to large church. So when the senior pastor leaves, are they typically bringing in a pastor from within the church pastoral staff, or what's the growing trend, or are they typically going outside the church?
Typically going outside. It's open. ECO is open to raising up internal leadership, so that's certainly something that could be considered. That's more difficult in some ways to have an internal candidate, especially if it's a church that's got a youth pastor who's kind of stepped up in the ranks. Like, some people are always going to see that guy as the youth pastor, no matter what his title is, no matter how many times he's preaching a year. So there are some leadership challenges in that, but the trend is still looking outward, though there's no reason why, if you have a very qualified, gifted internal candidate, that person shouldn't be considered. Okay, yep.
I have a question about helping untrained PNC ferret out the theology questions. There is a whole language, so to speak, I think that most lay people don't. And so we don't really know when they say this thing, that we recognize that's a theological trigger for them, and we may not really right over our head. So is there any reference material that you recommend to help the lay people get on board with how to look for theological strength in that?
Yeah, theological training is something you could ask. You could have that done within your church context, maybe from existing pastor staff or someone else in your church. The essential tenets that we have are good. I think they don't necessarily help people who haven't dabbled in sort of theological study. It still can be a lot of gobbledygook and big words that don't make sense, or we're not sure if they're really important anyway. One of the best things, if you've got someone in your church who has theological training, have someone like that on the PNC who can kind of be the person that's leading that side of assessment.
Ask your MPTs too, and your moderators, Presbyterian MPTs and moderators. They will help you, because they want you to get the right fit.
Okay, time for a few more questions.
No, not a question, but
Okay.
theology today was out in the area. Presbyterian of San Diego some time ago wrote a paper that they published called Essential Tenets in Theology.
Yep.
And it's a good primer for PNC students dealing with theology. But the MPT, it's called Theology Today, and it's Essential Tenets.
I served at Rancho Bernardo Community Presbyterian, and I had found that document when I was in North Carolina, the church serving there. And I didn't know that the authors of that were from San Diego Presbyterian, and I referenced it I said, there's a really great document I found that's floating around on the internet called The Essential Tenets of Reformed Distinctive, and the two authors were sitting there in the room like, someone actually, when they were interviewing me, questioning me afterwards, someone actually said, did you know that? I was like, no, I swear. But it is a very good document.
It's a good document.
Yep.
Yesterday you said something about candidates and the long silence.
Oh,
So
yeah.
as you are, narrowing your candidates, how do you talk to the ones that you're rejecting? Or what if you decide later you didn't want to reject them after all?
Yeah, it's awkward. Least favorite part of my job is telling people that they're not selected, that they're not moving on. And the hardest is when it gets down to the final 2 or 3. And these are people you've really invested time in, you've gotten to know. And generally, you're like, if you do the process well, you will find 2 or 3 candidates that you think any of these 2 or 3 could be our best. So it really comes down to like a matter of the Holy Spirit leading people towards you. And then calling them and just saying, this breaks my heart that we don't feel like God is calling you to be our pastor. So I do a lot of affirmation. I over communicate with candidates. The silence between hearing from churches when you're a candidate is excruciating. And so I would say the way that we try to care for our candidates in the process with us, like the way Presbyterians try to do it, is you're engaging candidates, be kind to them. Be considerate of the position they're in and acknowledge how excruciating it is to not hear anything. Because even though, the people in your church are thinking about this for about an hour a week on Sunday when there's no senior pastor. The committee is probably thinking about this 5 to 10 hours a week whenever they meet, and then when they have a little bit of brain capacity in the midst of regular life, during the rest of the week. The candidates are thinking about this every single day. I wonder if I'm going to hear from that church today. So being aware of what candidates are going through in the process, and this is something, and I'll just finish with this because we're at 10 after, and I'll end a little bit early so people can get lunch line early. And also, let's pass that bag around one more time. If you haven't put your card in there, please do, or a contact way, and we'll raffle off the Happy Church book by Tim McConnell. But I would say if I would wish for one thing for our PNCs to do is to care well for these pastors. I remember when I was in college and heard the college pastor, the guy that they're talking about, he had this group of guys, he was talking to us about dating girls. And he said, treat that girl when you're dating her like she's going to be someone else's wife. Because if you don't end up marrying her, she will be someone else's wife. And I would say that the same principle, treat these candidates like they're someone else's pastor. Because they will be someday. And if we do damage to these candidates by the way we treat them in the process, that has further repercussions that are going to affect other churches, likely in Econ. So if we could be really excellent at loving candidates through this process of discernment, even if it's calling them to say, we don't have a decision yet, stick with us, hold on for a few more weeks. That level of communication and giving them some dates, the next time we meet is on Monday and 2 weeks from now. We hope to have some further clarity by then. That kind of communication to them will go miles and miles towards help and fruitfulness in the search process. Okay. All right. We'll quick. We'll make them really, really quick.
I'm an interloper. I'm from the EPC.
Okay.
And I was kind of curious.
You want to come be a part of ECO? You're in. Come on.
Thinking about it, kind of 2 sides of the
All
same
right.
coin. But I was curious, one of the things that I've noticed just in being here for less than 24 hours is it doesn't seem that you have any face-to-face situations where you can meet with PNCs in this context.
We did yesterday.
You did yesterday. Of course, I found out about this
Yeah.
yesterday. Drove 10 hours to be here.
All right.
But so even multiple opportunities, being able to meet in a more casual context is really helpful for candidates such as myself. But it's also I'll say this as by way of advertisement. Some of the stories that pastors have are very unusual. I left the Peace USA and planted a church in a very, very poor neighborhood. We grew to 150 and were wiped out by a tornado, and then we had to rebuild, and then we ultimately, because the average income in our neighborhood was 11.5, we morphed and created a nonprofit in so many ways. And so to look beyond just what is written sometimes is important. If you just say, oh, the guy's church closed. Oh, okay, well, he's a loser. But a lot of times there's a great backstory to learn, whether the person is a good fit or not.
True. Good. Yep. I'll pass. Okay. All right. Where's the hairdryer bag? Thank you all so much for coming and just listening and being patient. I've got flyers. Take as many of those you want, and business cards up at the table, and I'll linger as long as there are people that want to have questions. And if you would, you put one in there. Now you have two in there. We really want this Happy Church book. You're going to go home, look, and it really is signed by Tim. So, all right, I'm going to have Charlie reach in, pull out someone's information, just one, make sure it's just one. I'll have to give away my tumbles here, but two. All right, Rex. All right, here you go, Rex. Great, thanks so much.